Hi everyone. So in this video, I will be helping you start your own podcast in 2023 with the help of Chatgpt. So obviously this video is for beginners. And just a quick introduction about me. So my name is Mia and I am a podcaster. I started my podcast back in 2021. My podcast is named Encourage to Try with Mia. It is mainly about self-help. So I do everything from creating content, recording, editing, publishing episodes, creative design, social media management, and website management. All throughout this video, I'll be sharing you the step-by-step process on how I started my own podcast, and hopefully this video will give you value. So with that said, here are the things to expect in this video. So section number 1 is your podcast, what your podcast is going to be about, the tone of your podcast, and the look and feel of your podcast. So, section number 2 is about tips and tools for recording and editing. And lastly, section number 3 is podcast distribution. So, this covers where you should easily distribute your podcast and how to upload your podcast. Right, so let's dive in. So, the about part of your podcast. So, there are top 3 questions to consider in this part. So, what is your podcast about? What topics will you cover? What is the purpose of your podcast? So, there are different purposes for your podcast. So, either to inform, to persuade, to enlighten, or to entertain. You can either choose one or combine any of these four as you go along your podcast episodes. So, for me, when I look back on previous episodes, the podcast is mostly about enlightenment. But again, you can combine these elements based on what you want to accomplish based on your episodes. So the next part is the tone of your podcast. So who are you talking to? Who is your target audience? You might have heard this advice a lot when you start something. You have to have your own niche. But at this point, if you are not sure about your niche, that's okay. When I started my podcast, I wasn't sure what my niche is. So I started with what I wanted to talk about, which is my life experiences and what I learned from them. So if you need help with finding your niche, here are some questions that can help you have an idea. Your niche is you. So questions to ask yourself. What are you passionate about? What are your interests, hobbies, life experiences? What value would you want to give to your listeners? For example, if you enjoy cooking, cleaning, budgeting, or organizing, you can share your tips on how to save more time, money, or even space. If you're an athlete, you can share how to improve on specific sports in terms of mindset or improved performance. If you are a movie or book enthusiast, you can provide summaries, reviews, or simply share your thoughts on what you've read or watched. So now we go to the podcast title and description. This depends on you. And make sure that when people see the title of your podcast and description, it tells them what your podcast is. If you have a hard time coming up with a podcast title and description, you can use the assistance of ChatGPT. If you're not aware of ChatGPT, in a nutshell, it's an AI language that helps you generate ideas and simplify your writing process. You can go to chat.openai.com to see what it is. So it's free and you can learn more about it by experimenting with it. So I'm gonna show it to you right now. We go to chat.openai.com. So click that and you'll be redirected to their website. So this is what it looks like. It's for free. So again, if you're having a hard time thinking about your podcast title and description, let's go first with podcast title. So you can type, can you help me come up with a podcast title? and it will respond. All right, so it responded, "Sure, I'd be happy to help you. Can you give me some more information about your podcast, about what your podcast is about? Knowing the topic or theme will help me suggest relevant and catchy titles." All right. For example, the type of podcast that you want to create is about encouragement or self help or self improvement. All right. So it generated potential podcast titles. So if you like any one of these titles in the list that ChatGPT suggested, make sure that you double check if some podcast already has this title, just to make sure that you don't have the same with other podcasters. So for example, we choose number 1, elevate yourself. Let's see, podcast. Right. So as you can see, there is already an Elevate Yourself project podcast. So just run through the list if you find any of this in the list of the title that you want, and just use Spotify to double check, or use YouTube as well to double check whether or not other people are already using that name. Now, after that, once you've settled with your podcast title, now we go to podcast description. My podcast is entitled Growth Mindset. You just have to indicate a lot of details so that ChatGPT will help you on what you're trying to do in terms of the help that you need from ChatGPT. So the more detail that you put in ChatGPT, the more it would help you accomplish what you're trying to look for. My podcast is entitled Growth Mindset. It is about, again, you can copy and paste what you've typed earlier. Can you make me a podcast description? Having this, it becomes easier for you to come up with a podcast title and podcast description. So if you already have your own, that's great. If you're just having a hard time, you can opt to choose ChatGPT. And with this, of course, you can copy this and paste it, and you can edit it. Like, you can refine what ChatGPT has generated. So it's really up to you what you want to do with it. At least ChatGPT has made it easier for you to start your own podcast. So now we go back to the slides. So once you're able to choose your podcast title and description, you can take note of that for now as we proceed to the next steps. But before that, I'd like to show you on how your podcast title and podcast description would look like. I got a screenshot from Spotify. This is the Spotify PC version. So this is just an example of a podcast title and podcast description from one of the podcasts that I listen to, which is a leadership podcast. You can see that this is their podcast title, which is Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast. And here on the lower right, I've enlarged it so you can read it properly. Clearly, their podcast is all about easy to understand leadership tip or anything about leadership. So the next example here. So this is a different podcast that I also listen to from the Spotify mobile version. So this is what your podcast will look like from the title and the about section. So again, I've enlarged it in the right side so that you can see it and read it properly. So immediately you've read that they talk about fitness that's backed up by science and can easily be understood by normal people who are not familiar with scientific stuff in terms of fitness. Now, the next part is the look and feel of your podcast, or in other terms, the creative materials of your podcast. So with this, you can opt to just create your own cover art for now, since you're just starting. For all my creatives, I mainly use Canva just because the basic features are free and easy to use. And If you are looking for more access or more features from Canva, you can opt to get their subscription plan, which is Canva Pro. If you choose to dive into all the creatives right away, I've also provided a checklist and visual examples that you might want to know. So, in the beginning, these are not mandatory to do simply because if you're starting out, you're still trying to discover yourself in podcasting. I suggest you start with what you can manage and do consistently, especially if you are a one man team. It's already a heavy task to think of content ideas. What more if you add the editing, creative, scheduling posts, and managing not just one but several different social platforms? But if you are able to manage all these things, then by all means, go for it. So here are the additional checklist for social creatives, which includes Facebook banner, YouTube banner and thumbnail, and episode posts. So again, this is what you need, which is, again, this is a podcast cover art. For the next example, in the same podcast, this is their Facebook banner and this is their Facebook display picture. As you can see in the display picture, though the design is a bit different from their Spotify cover art, I suggest that your creatives be aligned with one another to avoid confusion for your listeners. And for the Facebook banner, you can opt to have a picture of what they did here, the pictures of their podcast hosts, or you can use a different type of creative that is similar to your podcast cover art. In their YouTube banner and display picture are much better compared to their Facebook page because the design is aligned. Now, for the YouTube thumbnail, again, the design is up to you, and you can change the designs on which is effective for YouTube. For the episode posts, these types of posts can be used for different purposes, such as key takeaways, new episodes coming out, quote from the episode, or a question that you want to ask your listeners. These are not mandatory in getting your podcast off the ground. These are just extras that you can do once you master creating content for your podcast. But if you have money to spare, you can hire someone to help you out, whether it be for your creatives or overall management of your podcast. You can hire freelancers in Upwork, Fiverr, and even Facebook groups. So now we move on to tips and tools for recording and editing. So for the microphone, I have two mics that I use. One is the Mayono AU903 USB condenser mic, and the other mic is named ICIC USB condenser mic. These are the cost reference for these mics. So I live in the Philippines, so I converted the dollar into Philippine peso. The Miono cost me around 4,600 pesos or about $83. It's a bit expensive simply because I bought the full set, which has the arm, the pop filter, and everything that goes with it. And the other one is much cheaper and a bit smaller, which cost about 825 pesos or $15. So honestly, the quality of both these mics are great regardless of the price. I invested on a mic because the audio quality plays a big role in podcasting. So when recording, make sure that you use either headphones or earphones. Any will do, simply because when you record the sound, sometimes when you have your speaker on and your mic on, the sound of your speaker will be caught by your mic. So it's better that you keep the sound at a minimum because they can help you hear yourself better. And if you have a guest on your podcast, that will also help you hear them better. So now we go to the recording software. I use Zoom. Even during this recording right now, I'm using Zoom. I use it for both solo recordings or even with guests. The reason why I use Zoom is because it already has a built-in noise canceling feature and Zoom is for free. But if there is more than one person in the Zoom call, then the 40-minute limit applies. Again, if you have money to spend, you can opt to subscribe to Zoom to remove this. All right, so now that the recording part is done, we now go to the editing phase. So I've provided a table here, which consists of 3 different types of software that you can use. So these 3 software that I've placed here are the ones that I used or am using currently. Let's go to the first one, which is Audacity. So Audacity is perfect for editing audio recordings and it's free. However, it doesn't have the capability to edit video. And next one is CapCut. So CapCut is not only free but has a capability to edit both video and audio. And lastly, the one that I usually use is Premiere Pro. So unfortunately, Premiere Pro is not free, but it does a good job in terms of audio and video editing. That's just my preference. However, you can use other editing software out there. I'm just not that familiar. That's why I didn't put it here. I don't want to recommend something that I'm not yet that familiar with or not using. Again, if you have money to spend, you can opt to get Premiere Pro or hire someone to edit for you. Now, lastly, we go to the last section of this video, which is section 3, podcast distribution. So currently, I use Anchor. Again, this is not sponsored by Anchor. Anchor, the reason why I chose Anchor is because it's simple to use and it's free. At the time of this recording, Anchor is now rebranded as Spotify for podcasters. So I'm going to show you real quick how to use Anchor. All right, so you type here. I still use or type anchor.fm simply because I got used to it. But once you click this, it redirects you to podcasters.spotify.com. So they rebranded the platform. So this is what it looks like. So this is my podcast. Let's get to the first step, which is, for example, you've already finished your first recording for your podcast. So the step by step goes, I record my podcast episodes through Zoom. And then after recording, I edit through Premiere Pro. After editing through Premiere Pro, I go to anchor.fm or podcasters.spotify.com. So I click new episode. At the time of this recording, fortunately, you can now upload podcast with video through this platform. Unlike before, you're only able to upload audio recordings. So this is a big plus since now people can see video podcasts. This is what I usually do. So I quickly upload the edited file of the recording. So if you're not yet familiar, let's go to create an episode. So this is what it looks like. So you can record directly to this platform. These are the past recordings that I did. I paste it here and then drag it and drop it in this part. I'll just give you a quick example. Right after that, you can either add a transition, which helps your listeners be guided in some sort of way that they would be going to the next full episode of your podcast. So this is how it would go. So I'm going to play this right now.
I can contribute to things because I'm made this way. You'll get to plan already what are the next steps in order to conquer that problem.
Right. So that's just the example of how you would want to construct your episode. So yeah, so once you're done, you're able to save your episode. And then will be redirected to another page, which you would need to input your episode title here, right here. You can either save as draft if you are not yet done with your episode or if you're still fixing your episode. And this is where the episode description goes. You could share like a brief sentence on what the episode is about to get an idea of how the episode is for your listeners. Again, if you have a hard time creating one, you can always go back to ChatGPT to help you draft your episode description. And below the episode description, you can see the publish date. So you can choose to publish now, or you can opt to schedule your podcast episode on another date. And here it's optional. You can customize your episode through what season you're in, episode number, whether it's a full episode, a trailer, or just a bonus content. And here, the content is you can also choose whether it's clean or explicit. All right. So you can also change your episode art. So the episode art is different from your cover art. Your cover art is like a display picture on your social media. It's just on your podcast. So you can opt to change your episode art if that is your preference. Once you're done with everything, you can opt to publish now or again schedule your episode. So I'm going to show you right now where Anchor or Spotify for podcasters can distribute your podcast. So you can just go to settings on the upper right corner and you can check on the podcast availability. So this is how you distribute your podcast to different platforms aside from Spotify. So on Anchor, once you are able to upload your episode from what I've shown you earlier, it automatically is available on Spotify. And then if you scroll down, you can see all of these different platforms where you can put your podcast in or where you want your podcast to be available, such as in Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Google Podcasts, and so on. So aside from it being available on Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on different platforms, such as Amazon Music, for example. So on this, in order for you to have your podcast in their platform, you have to go to their portal. So this is a clickable link. So once you click it, you will automatically be redirected to their website and you need to log in to their website. And once you do, you're able to go to this. So this is where you will need to claim your podcast so that Amazon Music will know that it is your podcast. So this RSS feed will get you to other podcast platforms. You just have to copy it and then just paste it here and then submit. Or you can put your country. So currently, so I live in the Philippines. Just find Philippines here and then submit. I already claimed my podcast in their platform. That's why it says that this podcast has already been claimed by its owner. I'm just showing you how you're able to claim it on other platforms. So just click OK. So this is the same as in Anchor in their analytics. So you will also see this in other podcast platforms, such as this one. You'll see the overview of how your podcast is doing on each platform. So yeah, that's just how you're able to add your podcast to other platforms. So that's it. Let me know what you think about this video. Leave a comment below. Also, click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you've gotten any value from this video. Your support will help me create more videos like this to assist others like you on their podcasting journey. And that's all. Good luck.